My favorite thing about Shipt since I signed up for Target Circle 360? No price markups when I order same-day delivery from tons of local stores. Only a handful of alcohol retailers and items don't count. I won't lie, I've had too much fun being like, markups on groceries? Not in my fridge. Markups on pet food? Not for my DOG. Markups on tools, electronics, home goods, meds? Not in my house. Anyway, it's awesome. Order now at shipt.com/360. Terms apply.
Today's episode is brought to you by SalesCred Pro, the strategic resource for B2B sales that fortifies your credibility and accelerates the trust building needed for building successful business relationships. Get your free 7-day trial now at salescred.com/pro. Welcome to the Manage Smarter podcast with hosts C. Lee Smith and Audrey Strong. We're glad you're here for discussions on new ways to manage smarter, hire, develop, and retain talent, improve results, and propel team performance to new heights. This is the Manage Smarter podcast.
Our topic today, Lee, is something we really haven't touched on, and I'd say the umbrella really is ethics.
And for a good reason.
Ethics, moral compass versus the pressures of business. Where's the line that you don't cross over? Our expert today has it's kind of mind-blowing, deep life experience, both personally and in his career, to teach us about what to do when it comes to moral integrity versus your ambitions in business. That is the balance.
Right. And it's one of the things that we're all taught, we all know, and some people have a little bit more flexible, I don't know what's the word I'm thinking of, understanding of what that means.
Yes. Rules for me, not for thee. Or
oh my God,
thee,
it's my pet peeve.
Yeah,
it's my pet peeve. So yes, we're going to touch on that today because that is a credibility killer for executive management.
Exactly. Welcome to Manage Smarter, everyone. We're so glad you're here. I am Audrey Strong, the Senior Vice President of Communications here at Sales Fuel.
And I'm C. Lee Smith. I am the CEO and founder of Sales Fuel.
Okay, strap into your chair, folks. We've got Thomas Beener today. He's a securities attorney turned author whose new book, It's Better to March in Circles Than Not March at All, explores his life navigating the complex and high-stakes world of organized crime, law, and loyalty. He's got riveting personal stories involving deals, double lives, and decisions that most of us would never have to dream of making, and brings a unique perspective to leadership, risk, and decision-making. You're going to hear some great stories today, but also get some good tips from him. Thomas, thank you for coming. Tom, this is great.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to it.
All right. So you say your dad was a policeman, but also in the New York mob and a gambler and had hitmen on speed dial. My first question is, how did you avoid falling into a similar line of work and go to get your Juris Doctor?
Well, here's the thing. When I was young, I didn't know anything. And then as I got older, I knew my dad was a gambler because he would basically tell me gambling stories. And he would mention names like Omaha Butch and the Old Man and this and that. So I knew he had relationships with organized crime, but I didn't know how deeply they went. And I never asked questions, and he never really offered anything up. And then what happened, if I'm skipping too far ahead, I can back up. One day, he knew I did deals. I was in New York, and we raised money to buy real estate, apartments and that, and et cetera. And I did equipment leasing deals. I was in the trucking industry. My first job was a general counsel to a trucking company. And it was pretty sexy. They had their own jet, so I would fly on a jet. And one of my first, tell you a quick story. One of my first things, I was in Chicago with our sales guy, Jimmy Trupa, and he knew the guys that owned the hotel. And I'm sitting there, and one of the guys, the owner, sitting next to me, and he says, "Hey, do you like women?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, pick one out." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, just pick out a waitress. I'll send her up to your room." So that was my first indoctrination into this world. But going back to what you were saying, my dad's early days in gambling, and I mentioned it in my book, he was a cheater. He was a thief. And, a couple of the stories is, you would hold cards out of the deck. And to keep them, you can't like keep them in your shirt pocket or something. You would have a thumbtack and you would tack them under the table where you sat.
Oh, okay.
And the problem is every now and then some guy would say, "Hey, let's count the cards." Well, you might have two, three, four cards in your thumbtack. And you know, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to count to 52. So what dad would do is he would pull the tack and he would move it to the guy next to him. And someone would finally look under the table and there's John Jones, totally innocent. And my
Oh
dad would
my
go, "Look at
God.
that. He's got the cards." And they would go outside and beat him up. And that's that's kind of how he grew. He used to travel three-handed, and he would go to different towns. And one night, and you can stop me if I'm rambling, but one night there was a card game, and he had his thieves there, and some other thieves showed up, and he waved them off. You can't come in, and they came and told my dad. You can imagine what they told him, and he said, "Well, you know the rules." About 2 weeks later, they were found in the back of a trunk wrapped in barbed wire.
Oh my gosh.
And so that's kind of how I sort of knew what was going on, but it wasn't until he asked me about handling money that I was aware of the status of
Mhm.
his relationships.
I had someone who I knew, not closely, but whose family was in the same type of situation, and they did everything they could to keep him out of the family business. They sent him away to school, sent him to a good Catholic school, and everything like that, and he stayed out of the family business. So they were looking out for him to make sure that he didn't follow in their footsteps. Was you going the route that you went, was that your decision, your family's decision, a little of both, or how'd that work?
Well, it was a little bit of both. Oddly enough, although my dad had we'll just say, checkered past, he was really, when he approached me with this deal, I didn't know what he was talking about. I said, "Yeah, I can do that. That's not a problem." Well, then he got into it and he got into the board. And most people, um, don't even know a board exists. I've talked to different people that I know, and they don't know it exists. But he insisted it did, and I'm validating that. And so it was just when he did it, I said, "Well, what happened to the last guy that was doing this?" And they go, "Well, they thought he was cheating, so they wrapped him in chains and threw him in
Oh
the
my
ocean." And I said, "Well, what if he wasn't cheating?" He goes, "What difference does it make? He's in the ocean, the right reason or the wrong reason. Let's move on." And I said, "Well, if I do this, what's my life expectancy?" And he goes, "Well, if you cheat, you're dead. That's it. There's no comeback. If you do a good, not if you do a good job, but if you're honest and you didn't steal from them, you'll be there 5 to 7 years, and then after that, they decide what they want to do with you." So I didn't know if that meant I was going to be dead or not, but I figured 5 to 7 years, I get to know all these people that are significant players. I'll make a bucket load of money to leave to my daughter and wife, and I'll say I had a good life. And that was the decision process. He didn't make me do it, but he explained it to me, and he said, "If you want to do it, do it. If you don't, no harm, no foul."
Yeah,
And so
walk away and pick something else.
yeah,
Yeah.
I did it with a
Mhm.
5 to 7 year. Well, I didn't get it, but I went in with a 5 to 7 year life expectancy. That's
Now,
what I did.
before we move on to the business applications of all this crazy stuff that you went through, there was a situation I read in the book where you were freelancing and doing a deal for a fee of $50,000 from a securities law standpoint.
Yeah,
And this was somebody in your family, and they shorted you. They 40 grand, they were only going to pay you 10 grand. And it all got kind of into Hitmanville. Do you want to
right.
kind of tell us the short version of that? And that's honestly a good example of money's involved, business is involved, and your moral compass is being tested.
Yeah. Well, okay. That happened to be my father-in-law,
Yep.
and I did a deal with him. I bought his company, and then it got all discombobulated. The people always warned me, don't go into a family business. It's a real bad idea. So I did. So he owed me $50,000, and I went to meet him, and he handed me a check for 10. And he said, here's 10. I said, but you owe me 50. And he said, I don't. I said, look, you either owe me 50 or you owe me nothing. So I took nothing. So I'm upset. So I called my dad and I said, hey, I would like my father-in-law to be stepped on or killed, whatever expression you want to use. And he said, well, let me make a couple of phone calls.
Speed dial.
So he calls back and he said, okay, they'll do it and they'll do it for free. They owe me favors. So we need his license plate number. We need this, we need that. And I said, well, how are they going to do it? He said, well, uh, they'll just overdose him with heroin. I said, he doesn't use drugs. My dad said, he tried, he screwed up. That's life. And that was the mindset. So anyway, that was the first part. So he said, you decide whether you want to do it. So I called.
All of a sudden, this became a show on collections.
Correct. And so I said, okay. And then I called him and he said, look, I'm not telling you not to do it, but I'm advising you not to do it. The problem is there's no statute of limitations. And he said, if you do it, one day you're going to be sitting there with your wife and you're going to be in an all romantic mood and you're going to tell her what you did. And at
Oh,
that point, your life is over. And so he said, but you want it done? I'll call them. It'll be done. And I backed out.
hmm.
I didn't want that to happen. So that was that one event. One other quick one I'll mention, I had a guy in New Jersey who reminded me of Joe Pesci from the Godfather,
Yes.
and he owed me money. And I called, and he wouldn't pay. I called my dad and I said, hey, can you go send the boys out and collect? He goes, yeah, I can. But he said, here's the thing. He said, they'll bring you the money. But he said, if the guy retaliates, that's a whole new nickel. You got to pay to be protected. And he said, the last guy I helped, he said, yeah, they burnt down his house. So I said, nah, we'll let that one go too. So those are just a couple of kind of what I went through. But my dad was always, I hate to say he was moral, but he had a morality. The whole thing had a morality to it. And no one just jumped in and did something. It was always well thought out, well constructed. So
Hmm.
those are just a couple of the things I went through.
So
All
you
right,
say
Audrey, bring us
the
around.
number one mistake that the leaders make is thinking that the rules apply to everyone but
But
them.
not them.
And
Yeah.
you said that I should ask you basically that how leadership in extreme situations can parallel everyday management. So put the two worlds together for us, because a lot of our audience hasn't obviously come out of a family life experience like you, but how can
Yeah.
they apply it to their jobs?
Well, here's what I would say. I mean, Henry Ford, I mean, unless you're real young, you don't know. He founded Ford Motor and did the assembly line and all
Right.
sorts of stuff. He had a famous phrase. He said, never complain, never explain. And that's what drove him. And that's what I would say as a generic thing. I mean, at an upper level, a lower level, it's you make decisions, and I'm not saying you ignore people, you confront them, but you just say, hey, you're just not going to fit in. Or we really liked having you here, but it's not working out. You don't dwell. The more you try to explain your actions, the more you open the door uh, for debate and controversy. And then I
And
bet, yeah,
exposure.
Well, you're a lawyer, exposure, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, and so you just you try to be fair. You meet with them, you talk with them, and then you just hit them with the bottom line. I'm sorry. It's like the baseball movie with Brad Pitt, and he's
Moneyball.
Moneyball.
yeah, And he's telling this guy, hey, you got to learn to fire a guy. And he's going, whoa. And he says, you just say, you're leaving, it's over. Here's who you contact, move on. Because the whole time I was going through this, that's all we ever got. Yeah, Tom's in the running. That was the answer. It wasn't, oh, he's in first or second or third, or he's this or he's that. It was just, I was in the running, my papers were on the table. That was the explanation. And then when it was over, they just said, hey, it's over. And I remember my dad said in the phone call, he said, well, we really thought we would get it. And he said, well, I can understand, but it's over. That was the dismissal. So I'm just saying, if I would encourage people, if they get into a management role, or even if someone is letting them go, just stick with the facts, make it short, make it sweet, and otherwise you leave bad feelings, and you never know what's going to happen tomorrow. And so that's kind of my advice on this.
The other piece of advice that I take from your stories is just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do it. And we all have powers and things like that we can do. And if we rush headlong into doing it or whatever, the next day we wake up and say, it wasn't my best.
Well, that's why I'm complimenting my dad, because look, when I called like about my father-in-law, I was angry. I wanted
sure,
revenge.
yes.
I wanted him. And then my dad calmed me down and just said, well, okay, it's set up, but think about it. Be careful. Don't put yourself in a bind. And that was the other thing. You're right. I mean, we all say, man, if I could, I would have this guy hung or something like that. Well, you can do it. But do you really want to? Do you really want to pay the price? Nah, that's a whole different kettle of fish.
Yeah, I was going to say my ex-husband, that's another story. We'll talk offline about that. You talk about rule bending. Okay, so the code of conduct and, in your career as an attorney, bending rules, you say, is almost as bad as saying they don't apply to me at all. The ones that I am going to follow, I'm bending, because you said it basically undermines your credibility as a leader and provides a lack of trust. Let's talk about that.
Okay. Well, here's the way, okay, I'll just say the major leagues, what I was dealing with. It's, okay, you're dealing with a group of people, but you're talking to one head guy. Now, if they have a meeting to decide something, no one ever says, well, let's go wipe out Tom, or let's go do this. They just drop little hints. And then the chief guy makes the decision. But the point is, after it's all over, they can all walk out of the room. And let's say they're going to be interviewed by the press, which they weren't, but let's assume they would. They would all say, oh, no, I said Tom's a great guy. He's a great guy. No one ever will say we should have him wiped out. They don't leave a trail. They just leave their inference. And everybody knows what their inference is. And so that's the thing. They don't hide, but they just phrase things. It's like if you ever listen to wiretaps and they'll say, well, someone should say something to him. Well, what is that? Everybody knows what it means. It means go get him. And so I think it's the same thing in normal business. It's like you don't want to be pigeonholed as the guy that made the decision. You may be the CEO and it's arguably your decision, but you say, well, I met with the board decided. You don't hide from it, but you don't bring it all on yourself. If that makes any sense.
So the other thing I take from that again is the lesson of, if you're going to say something mean, nasty, or whatever, don't do it in writing.
Exactly.
Don't do it. You don't want to write anything in an email, a text, or anything like that that's going to be read in a deposition somewhere.
Exactly. And that's the thing. I mean, it's just a smooth thing. And privately, they may have private conversations where they swear up and down and yell and scream and all sorts of stuff. But, I'm going to say publicly, they don't. They're very gracious, they're very nice, and they say nice things about you. The decision was made. Or who made it? Well, everybody made it, but everybody loves you. So how come I'm out? Well, it's just you didn't fit. That's kind of how it works.
It's interesting. We got about 2 minutes left. The book, everybody, you can get it on all major book outlets. I looked at it on Amazon. It's called "It's Better to March in Circles Than Not March at All." Lee, I'm going to give you the final question while we wrap up.
It pertains to the title of the book, because I want to know how you came up with the title, because at its face, I'm not sure I agree with it. So
Here's how I came up with it. I used to live in Greenwich, Connecticut, and I had a mentor, Orhan Sadakhan. And when he was a kid, he lived in Dresden, Germany, World War II. And his mother sold her wedding ring to get him out of the country. And she got him out of the country just before the bombing hit, the firebombing hit. And he went to Egypt. And he was my mentor. But he always used to use this phrase. I would call him sometimes and say, "Man, I can't do anything. The market sucks." And he would say it in Italian, which I can't do. But it was a Mussolini phrase. Mussolini used to use that phrase. And so I took it from Orhan. And that's why I thought it was kind of a tribute
Interesting.
to Orhan. And that's where it came from. It's a Mussolini phrase. And I thought it worked well. And plus, I traveled in circles to get, end up without a deal. But that's what I did. So that's where it came from. Long answer to a short question.
Well, what a show, Audrey. We start with the mob and end up with Mussolini.
Mussolini. Tom, I got to tell you, this has been very, very interesting. I hope people that you basically were operating in your family life and semi in your professional life under a whole different framework than somebody who's working for, say, like a veterinarian.
And I'll just tell you, I know you got to cut off, but I'll just tell you this. What was really hard was to work like at a job. I had two business partners.
Like a straight job. Yeah.
This. But by the same token, thinking one day the phone's going to ring and I'm going to be rolling in money. So it's really hard to keep a focus on grocery bills and mortgages and stuff when you're saying, "Hey, shit, in 60 days, it doesn't matter." So that was one of the hardest things, is to keep a perspective, because it may change. Well, it didn't, but it may. So
in hindsight, glad you didn't get the job, or wish you had gotten the job, or based on your training, you never thought about it again?
Well, okay. I've been to a couple of, I don't know, psychic's not the same word, but that type of person.
A medium.
Medium, that's it. And I would tell them, and they would go, "It was divine intervention." Now, I don't know if I believe that. To be straight up, I wish I would have gotten it. I would have paid my 5 to 7 years. Maybe I'd still be here today. Maybe I wouldn't, but I really wanted to do it. I really did. So that's, I don't know.
Well, Tom needs revenue, so people buy the book.
Yes, absolutely. Keep him away from the dark forces.
That's right. This has been a pleasure. It's so great meeting you. Thank you, Tom, for being on the show.
I thank you guys too. Thanks for your help.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend on iTunes, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more great information at salesfuel.com.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.